Picture a school of fish. Picture a peloton of bicyclists. Government institutions that drift in the same ideological direction at the same speed. The cathedral is essentially this. Mainstream academia, journalism, and NGOs. In a free society we should see intellectual inhomogeneities between these competing institutions. The universities formulate public policy, and the press guides public opinion. In other words, the universities make decisions, for which the press manufactures consent. This system has no leader, no central committee. It is a true peer-to-peer network, which makes it extraordinarily resilient. Harvard always agrees with Yale, which is always on the same page as Berkeley, which never picks any sort of a fight with the New York Times, except of course to argue that it is not progressive enough. This is not a conspiracy theory, it's not suggesting there's a secret campaign for organized repression. It's positing something more like patriarchy. Patriarchy doesn't have an actual patriarch coordinating men in their efforts to keep down women. It's just that when lots of people share strong cultural norms, they manage to self-organize into a kind of immune system for rejecting new ideas. Essentially anarcho-tyranny. Consider the filed drawer effect. That is, studies that turn up an exciting result everyone wants to hear get published, and studies that turn up a disappointing result don't, either because the scientist never submits it to the journals, or because the journal doesn't want to publish it. If this happens all the time in medical research, how often do you think it happens in sociological research? Robert Putnam infamously stumbled across data showing potential downsides to diversity. Less people vote, less volunteer, less give to charity and work on community projects. In the most diverse communities, neighbors trust one another about half as much as they do in the most homogeneous settings. The study, the largest ever on civic engagement in America, found that virtually all measures of civic health are lower in more diverse settings. Putnam originally chose to keep his findings quiet, until they were leaked by a colleague. I cannot blame Putnam for his behavior, however. Those who do not take such precautions are attacked by the cathedral. 𝒞𝒂𝒯𝐻𝐸𝒟𝒂𝐿 Associate Professor and Chair, Philosophy, Gender and Sexuality Studies, Media Studies, Environmental Studies, and Sciences, Political Economy. Wrote for the journal 𝒞𝒂𝒯𝐻𝐸𝒟𝒂𝐿, where she published a double-blind peer-reviewed article which examined the merits of transracialism. Transracialism is detrimental to the cathedral, as it is seen to empower right-wing critiques of transgenderism. In response to her work, an open letter was formed with 830 signatories, including academics, scholars associated with 𝒞𝒂𝒯𝐻𝐸𝒟𝒂𝐻𝐸𝒟𝒂𝐿's own journal and even 2 members of 𝒂𝒂𝒂𝐻𝐸𝒟𝒂𝐻𝐸𝒟𝒂𝐿's dissertation committee. The letter urged the journal to retract the article, open its editorial procedures to scrutiny, and release a statement about improving its review process. This led to the resignation of 𝒞𝒂𝒯𝐻𝐸𝒟𝒂𝒂𝐻𝐸𝒟𝒂𝐿's editor-in-chief along with 8 associate editors. The school board also suspended the associate editor's authority to appoint the next editor. Apologies were posted by the journal's editors. Philosopher Kelly Oliver described one of the apologies as, quote, like something ISIS makes its captors read in a hostage video before beheading them. End quote. But why? The rule is simple, only include political propositions whose adoption tends to strengthen the cathedral, and weaken its enemies. Mainstream journalists tend not to attack academia. NGOs tend to not fund studies that could indict academia or the press, etc. etc. Take this leaked email from influential climate scientist Michael Schlesinger, written to New York Times journalist Andy Revkin. The email states, quote, shame on you for this guts reportage. The vibe that I am getting from here is that your reportage is very worrisome to most climate scientists. I sense that you are about to experience the big cutoff from those of us who believe we can no longer trust you, me included. End quote. I wonder, how many unleaked emails exist? For example, the New York Times largely ignored the Evergreen College riots, where students patrolled their campus with baseball bats, stopping cars in search of a Jewish professor. The Times was uncharacteristically late to report any facts about the case, showing up months late, and finally chalked the incident up to be the fault of right-wing provocateurs. Take for example Charles Murray, who was attacked by a university mob for his studies on race and IQ. The mob surrounded Murray and began to assault him. Alison Stanger, Murray's debate opponent, tried to shield Murray. According to a Middlebury spokesman, a protester grabbed her hair and twisted her neck. She was forced to recover in a neck brace and suffered permanent damage to her neck and back. Take for example the ADL, which changed the definition of ACAB, all cops are bastards, after the term was popularized by the left. The ADL's new definition was worded in a way to attack skinheads while absolving far-left extremists. The SPLC goes to similar lengths to excuse Antifa, radical environmentalists and animal rights activists, falsely claiming that no deaths have ever been attributed to these movements. They have also recently stopped listing any groups as black separatists. Groups like the SPLC and ADL frequently cite each other, and are used in New York Times articles to give an objective edge to what would otherwise be a subjective claim of bigotry. This blatant defense of the cathedral's interests led to the SPLC issuing an official apology and a financial settlement to Maajid Nawaz. Further examples include the New York Times and other media outlets blaming churches and right-wing protests for the spread of COVID-19, while absolving left-leaning civil rights protests entirely. Almost immediately, NGO reports were conjured showing no relation between the large-scale civil rights protests and the spread of the virus. Soon after, at the peak of American COVID deaths, over 1,000 health professionals signed a letter saying, "Don't shut down protests using coronavirus concerns as an excuse," declaring that racism was a public health emergency. The letter, signed by 1,200 health professionals including Dr. Abby Hussain, an infectious disease fellow at the University of Washington, Alyssa Letourneau, MD Medical Director, Antimicrobial Stewardship Program Harvard Medical School, Charlie Roscoe, Harvard School of Public Health, Christian Tester, Statistical Analyst, Harvard School of Public Health, Jim Recht, MD Cambridge Health Alliance/Harvard Medical, Greg Gonsalves, Yale School of Public Health, Carla Neugebauer PhD Biochemist, Yale University, etc., etc. Times 1000. The letter went on to urge the public as follows. 1. Do not disband protests under the guise of maintaining public health and safety. 2. Prepare for an increased number of infections in the days following a protest. 3. Finally donating to bail funds for those arrested. Again, this is medical advice. This exemplifies the fallacy of representative government with the far more insidious fallacy of scientific government. Think about it. You read the New York Times, or similar. It reports that scientists say X or Y or Z and there is a name at the top of the article. It might be Abby Hussain, infectious disease fellow, or Charlie Roscoe, Harvard School of Public Health, or the list is, of course, endless. Do you know Abby or Charlie? How do you know that the impression you get from reading their stories is the same impression that you would have if you, personally, saw everything that Abby or Charlie saw? Why do you see their stories as anything but an attempt to guide you in interpreting the world in a certain way, and deliver your vote accordingly? You trust Abby or Charlie, in other words, because they are speaking, quite literally, ex cathedra, i.e. from the chair, a theological term which signifies authoritative teaching and is more particularly applied to the definitions given by the Roman pontiff. Originally the name of the seat occupied by a professor or a bishop, cathedra was used later on to denote the magisterium, or teaching authority. These professionals are recognized as official authorities. Uncle Sam may not tell the University of Colorado what to do, but the converse is not the case. And if you are a bureaucrat fighting for some outcome or other, and you can bring Abby or Charlie in on your side, you are more likely to win. Usually, they are compensated quite well for this service. To separate university and state the way church and state are separated, we need to make some fairly drastic changes. Of course, all the rivers of state cash that flow to the universities need to be plugged. No grants to professors, no subsidies for students, no nothing. But this is the easy part. The hard part is that to divorce itself completely, the state needs to stop recognizing the authority of the universities. For example, it is staffed largely with university graduates, many of whom are students of Professor Rabbi and Charlie and the like. Perhaps there is no way to avoid this, but there is a way to make it not matter. Add university credentials to the list of official no-nos in HR decisions. Treat it like race, age, and marital status. Don't even let applicants put it on their CV. Instead, use the good old system, competitive examination. Okay, that takes care of the universities. Moving on to the press. The case that created the modern American system of government by leak was the Pentagon Papers case. Basically, the Pentagon's leadership was pursuing a war that its own experts had decided was unwinnable. These hidden power networks, leaks and whistleblowing are one of the main tools that civil servants use to govern Washington from below. They feed the New York Times not just information, but often what are essentially pre-written stories, under the table. Eliminating selective disclosure terminates this whole nefarious network. When the US government has something to say, it says it. And it says it to all Americans at the same time. There is no privileged network that gets secret, special access. There is, however, a second, more extreme option. We will discuss this later.